I lied. Because this story that I'm about to tell you is the scariest story I've ever heard. If you're new here, hi. I just talk about some pretty scary stuff, and recently I opened an email where anyone who finds this page would be able to submit their ghost stories. And let me tell you, not only have I been getting an abundance of stories that I have loved reading that are from every corner of the earth, these are actually scary. And what I mean by actually scary is exactly that. They actually freak me out. On my last video, I said this was the scariest story that I've ever heard. This one. So I just heard scratching, and as you can see, it's still day out, and that's the only time I really film these videos is during the day because I'm a scaredy cat. So I don't know what that's about, because I thought it was my boyfriend pranking me, so I looked outside and there's no one there. Only when I did the intro for this person. So I'm gonna redo it, and if it happens again, I hope it's on video. So anyways, this story comes from Dakota, who opens the email like this. This is the story about a who disguised itself as a little girl and haunted me for 2 years. Dakota then gives us some background context and says that she's a medium. She has seen, felt, heard, and touched spirits since she was around 5 years old. Which in retrospect is really scary when you think about it. But she says it all started when she was staying at her mom's house 2 hours away. She had a friend who lived right in front of the woods, and they decided to play hide and go seek. So Dakota finds a great hiding spot in between a shed and a chain link fence. And she says she was hiding, looks over to her right, and on the other side of the fence is a little girl staring at her. And as soon as her and this little girl made eye contact, the little girl reached through the chain link fence and grabbed her wrist. Dakota yanks her hand back and looks back at this little girl, and she is not there anymore. It is also to be noted that this was around fall time, so there were leaves on the ground and branches and twigs and etc. And she didn't hear anyone walk away or run. So Dakota runs out, tries to tell her friend what had happened, and her friend is just not having it because she's scared. Fast forward 2 months, and she's back at her dad's house and having a sleepover with an old friend. As Dakota and her friend are talking to each other on her bed, she looks over at the doorway, and the little girl is standing right in the doorway. She didn't really think anything about it because at the time, all the neighbor kids were allowed to just kind of walk in her house. And I know families like that, so I understand. But she did a double take, and the little girl was gone the next time she looked. She asked her friend, "Did you see someone?" And her friend said, "No, I didn't see anyone." And Dakota said, "Little did I know this was the beginning of a 2-year ordeal." Dakota says every day since then, she sees this little girl in her house. And this little girl did not talk. She just stared at Dakota a lot of the time. And sometimes she would only show half of her face from around the corner. And I'm going to quote this. But her favorite thing to do was watch me sleep. Dakota includes in her email that she likes sleeping in complete darkness, and the only thing that is radiating light in her room is her alarm clock that is blue. And she says every single night she would wake up and see this little girl standing in the doorway, watching her sleep. Dakota says that the most active this little girl was when she was home alone, cleaning her room. Dakota, while cleaning her room, looks over into the living room, and just for some context, she lives in a trailer, so it's completely open concept, so you can look through rooms. She looks into the living room and sees a little girl standing there, watching her. As soon as they make eye contact, the little girl runs into the kitchen, so Dakota follows her. And once she goes into the kitchen, the little girl's standing in front of the fridge. The moment they make eye contact, the little girl runs into her dad's room. So she goes into her dad's room, nobody's there. She's looking around, nothing. Hears a loud bang coming from the laundry room, goes into the laundry room, sees the little girl standing in front of the washer and dryer. Then she runs back into the kitchen, and Dakota didn't see her the rest of the day. And Dakota says that it was really common for this little girl to not speak ever, but she would want Dakota's attention, so she would run around and kick things and knock things off counters and slam cabinets, etc. But fast forward 2 years, and Dakota's obviously used to it by now, but she hasn't seen this little girl in 4 months. Until one day, she saw her in her dream, and it was Dakota's first lucid dream. Dakota says that she goes to sleep, wakes up, and everything in her dream feels so real. She turns over at the clock and it reads 3:16. When Dakota turns her head back around, there the little girl is. And she looks normal little girl that she's seen for the past 2 years at this point. And all of a sudden, this little girl starts to look really mangled and disgusting. She starts developing this smile and these teeth and sprints at Dakota, where Dakota falls back in her bed and wakes up. Looks over at the clock, 3:16. Dakota gets up, goes to the bathroom, and as she's standing up from using the bathroom, the little girl's standing in the doorway. She looked like the same little girl that she's seen the past 2 years, until again she looked really mangled and disgusting and sprints at Dakota, where Dakota falls backwards screaming. And they had this animal cage in their bathtub at the time that they were cleaning, falls back on that, and she could feel the cage under her. But nonetheless, she wakes up again. And it is again 3:16 a.m. But at this point, Dakota is too scared to move and too scared to do anything, so she just sits there until the sun comes up, where she feels safe. Dakota then, that morning, started to feel this burning sensation on her back, goes and looks in the mirror, and there's a huge gash on her back from where she fell onto something. Her then best friend comes over later that day and also has spiritual connections, and tells her about this dream that she had where she was watching in third person and verbatim describes the dream that Dakota had twice. And at this point in time, Dakota did not tell her what was going on. Dakota then ends her email by telling us that if you see a clock or a phone in your dream, it means you're not really dreaming. And as corny as it sounds, she really and truly believes that this little girl was disguised as trying to get her when she was in her most vulnerable state, sleeping. But that experience was 5 years ago, and she hasn't seen that little girl since. And this is all I'm going to say. I don't know how people deal with that stuff for years. I dealt with it for a month, and no. That story was really long. However, I think it was the best story I've read so far. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for my ghost stories.
I didn't think this story was going to be as scary as it was, but it definitely is, so let me just start. So this guy says that when he was younger, one of his distant aunts passed away. He says that he really didn't know her, but he could tell the big impact that her death made on the family. Since they all traveled into the town that she passed away at, they sent him to go and spend the night with his cousins. He explains how they weren't going to stay at the cousin's house, but at their cousin's grandmother's house. He had never met their grandmother until then, and he explains how she was really nice and even asked him to call her Mama Carmen. And no, it was not his grandmother. He was related to the uncle. The aunt was by law married, and his aunt, so it was the mom's mom, so not his grandmother, but his cousin's grandmother. I hope that makes sense. He explains that Mama Carmen's house was really big and it was made out of wood and it was so pretty, but he knew that there was just something off or weird about it. So when nighttime came, they directed him to this really big room in the house, and the older cousin said something to him that just threw him off. Before walking out of the bedroom, his cousin tells him, hey, whatever you do, just don't respond to them. And he was like, what? What do you mean? And the cousin tells him, just don't respond to the voices. Don't respond to the thing that's gonna talk to you from under the bed. Bitch, if you think I was about to stay there, I'm gonna go wherever you're going after that, because what the hell? However, he knew his cousins and how much they play around, all the pranks they've done on him in the past. So he was just like, ugh, this is another prank, so whatever, yeah, I won't listen to the voices. He also admits that when his cousins would stay at his house, he would also scare them, so obviously he just thought this was a joke. So he ends up falling asleep and then wakes up to a voice calling him by his name. Felipe. He thought he was dreaming, but as he opened his eyes, he could have sworn that he heard that last little Felipe. Not me giving myself goosebumps right now. So he's laying there very still, awake, and hears nothing. And as he's drifting off to sleep again, he hears that voice again. Felipe. This time, he recognized the voice calling him by name. It had been a very long time since he had heard that voice. It was almost like he had forgotten what that voice sounded like, and it was because it was his mom's voice, his mother who was no longer living. He immediately gets up and starts walking towards the door. He says he doesn't even want to look back. He doesn't even have the courage to look back and see what is underneath the bed, but he exits the room. However, when he finally makes it to the door where his cousins were sleeping, he said that he felt embarrassed. He thought to himself, if I go in there and tell them that I'm scared or tell them that I heard voices, they're never gonna let it go. I'm gonna have to hear this for the rest of my life, and he didn't want to deal with that. He said that it took him a minute to grow some courage, but he just turned around and went right back to the bedroom that he was sleeping in. He walks down the hallway, goes into the room, lays down, and he's laying there for a good minute. And finally, he is drifting off to sleep, and that is when he hears the voice again. Felipe, I forgive you. You have nothing to forgive me for, he said, half asleep, responding to the voice. You wish for me to die, but I forgive you, the voice responded. So this is where Felipe finally starts telling us a story about what happened with his mom back when she was alive. And he says that he has to confess something that he had never told anyone. His mom was really sick, so sick that she fell into like some sort of paralysis on her body. And he had to take care of the mom because the dad basically abandoned them when this happened because he couldn't deal with it. So can you imagine, like, the mom fell into paralysis, the dad left because he just couldn't deal with it, and he left his son to take care of a fully grown adult. He does say that the dad did continue to send them money to help out around the house, but he never showed up. He stopped playing outside with the neighborhood kids. He stopped doing his homework. He didn't go to school anymore. And all he did all day long, 24/7, was to take care of his mom. And he admits that at that time, he really hated his life and everybody who was in it. And yes, it's true. He really wished for his dad to die for doing this to him, but he also admits that he wished for his mom to die as well. He says that he doesn't wish her dead the same way he wished his dad dead. He wished her dead just so that she can get some peace, so that she wouldn't be in pain, and so that he can also just be a kid again. And he says that it was really hard to take care of her because she couldn't eat by herself, she couldn't shower by herself, she couldn't even go to the restroom. So it was things that he had to do for her, and it was a lot. But that desire for his mom to die was something that he never told anyone, not a single soul. And this is in fact the very first time that he's writing this down for this podcast to share with the world. So we go back to the voice telling him that she forgives him for wishing her dead. He is more asleep than awake when he asks for forgiveness to the voice that sounds like his mom. He admits that he doesn't know if it was really his mom or what was underneath that bed, but because of what the voice said, he wanted to ask for forgiveness, and he actually put his hand down underneath the bed. He didn't know what he expected. He didn't know if he expected somebody to grab his hand, for someone to say that he's forgiven, but he put his hand down there and actually fell asleep with his hand just hanging there. After falling asleep, he was awoken by a weird sound, and when he opened his eyes, it's when he felt a sensation of something touching his hand. He explains how the hand felt really rough, and it was definitely coming from underneath that bed. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but no, this was definitely not a dream. He was definitely awake. So by this point, the hand was already grabbing at his chest, and he was terrified. He said his heart was beating so fast. However, his curiosity won over the fear that he was feeling. So he literally moved to the edge of the bed and looked to see what was coming out from underneath the bed. What he saw was this very long, gray, old-looking hand coming from underneath that bed. It was fucked up. It was scary. As he was looking at the hand, he could see his hand next to that other hand, so he knew he was awake, but he couldn't take in what he was seeing. It was a lot, and it was crazy. He said at that point, his body became very cold. He was very stiff, and he can still look at his hand and at the hand grabbing at it now, like they're trying to pull him down. And in that very moment, as he's being pulled down, the voice is saying, I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. Over and over again. It was at this moment that voice completely changed. It didn't even sound like his mom's voice anymore, and it sounded like it was making fun of him. So now the voice was like mocking him, saying, do you forgive me? Do you forgive me? Like over and over. He said that the way the voice changed was like it was using his mom's voice, and then all of a sudden it was just not his mom at all. So like it was trying to trick him. For some reason, this reminds me of Leprechaun. Have you guys seen it, where like his voice changes? That was also the moment where he remembered what his cousin told him. If a voice is talking to you, do not respond. He wanted to take that advice, so he decided to stay quiet, but at that moment, it was too late. He had already talked back to the voice. Without knowing what to do, he said that he literally bit his mouth so that he wouldn't talk anymore, closed his eyes, and just stayed very still. He even tried to let go of the hand that was holding him, but the more he tried to let go of the hand, the more the hand was trying to pull him underneath the bed. Felipe, let me go. I'm getting scared. I can't do it. Felipe, let me go. Felipe, let me go. That's what the voice was telling him now. He finally understood that that was not his mom. That was not his mom's ghost. That was not his mom at all. It was actually the complete opposite of what his mom was. So he fought. He said that he fought for the longest time. He tried to hit. He tried to hold on to the bed. He was not about to let this thing drag him under. And he was successful because it finally let go of his hand from all the fighting that he was doing. And when that happened, he immediately turned to the side of the bed where the wall is, where that thing cannot reach him. He said that he sat there next to the wall on the bed, just waiting for a hand to come up and try to get him again. And it was the longest silence he had ever experienced. But that was also when the sun finally came out and he heard somebody in the kitchen. He literally jumped off the bed to the door into the kitchen, and it was Mama Carmen that was in there. He told Mama Carmen everything that had happened in the bedroom the entire night. He admits that she never interrupted him. She heard everything he had to say. When he finally finished telling her what happened, she just looked at him, smiled at him, and said, "You shouldn't give anything that much importance." That surely it was a hallucination or he was dreaming. That maybe it was because of him going to the cemetery and funerals because of that aunt that passed away that might have caused him to hallucinate or have these types of dreams. She also asked him not to pay attention or to listen to his cousins because they're little scaredy cats and they also love scaring people but were scared as well. She told Felipe that they used to sleep in that bedroom and then didn't want to sleep in that bedroom anymore, so maybe they made it up so that no one could sleep in there. Sorry, what? You're telling me that they've experienced this, but you're saying they made it up because what? She said that she believes that they made up this story so that they can move out of that bedroom and somebody else occupy the space that they were always scared to sleep in. He admits that he would have loved to believe her saying that they made this up, but how would they explain the voice? How could he explain the things that the voice was saying that only he knew? Now I'm curious as to what his cousins experienced in that room because it's obvious that they've experienced something. He was like, there's no way that they could have pranked me with my mom's voice and saying things that I had never told anybody. So yeah, she doesn't want me to be scared, but I believe my cousins and I believe they experienced something in there. He also says that he's never gonna forget what that hand looked like. That was not a dream. That was not something that he dreamt of. He was awake and he was there. But man, I would not know what to do if that happened to me. What do you guys think?
There was this man named Alan, and Alan said when he was younger, he remembers this one time being at his grandfather's house. And all of his cousins, all the grandkids were around, and most of his family. Well, his grandfather says to the kids, I want to give you each a gift. And one by one, he, handed each one of the kids a gift. When he gets to Alan, he gives him, something that is wrapped up in this cloth. So Alan unwraps it, and he said it was a dream catcher. And his grandfather said, I got this from a man. He said it's like an authentic dream catcher. Put it above your bed and it'll keep, your dreams or you from having nightmares and anything negative from going after you. So he said he got this feeling something was going to happen to his grandfather, something he didn't know why he was giving him gifts. That night, he ended up staying the night at his grandfather's house. And his grandpa's like, go ahead, take the dream catcher, and put it in your room that you're going to sleep in tonight above your bed. So he hung it up above the bed and everything and kind of forgot about it. Well, he said him and his grandfather were downstairs. They were watching wrestling on TV. And his grandfather falls asleep. So he said, you know what? It's getting kind of late. I'm going to head to bed. So he makes his way to this spare bedroom and he goes and lays down. Well, he said all of a sudden he thought at the time he was having a dream, but he got up out of bed and he started walking towards like the back door of the house. And he got within a few feet of the back door. And he said all of a sudden the lights flickered and the back door like opened by itself. And he said there was nothing out there. And he was like, expecting someone to just like walk through the door or something. And he said all of a sudden he heard something say, Alan, Alan. And he was like, scared. But he said he couldn't like move. It was like drawing him towards the door. And he said right as he got ready to go out the door, this door just slammed shut. And it was like that. And he kind of like came back to reality and was like, what's going on? Like, what am I doing out here and stuff? So he like goes into the living room where his grandpa's sleeping, and he just like checked on his grandpa, made sure he's all right. And he said all of a sudden his grandpa just stood up, and he said he was speaking like another language. And when he looked at his eyes, like they were like solid black. And he said like it was freaking him out because his grandfather didn't speak any other languages, and he had no idea what he was saying. And he was just yelling and yelling and yelling. So he takes off running, back into the bedroom. And he said like he could hear his grandpa coming through the hallway. And his grandpa started to bang on the door and speak even louder in this other language. And the only thing he could think of was like the dream catcher has something to do with it. And so he took the dream catcher off the wall, and he said he like blinked and he woke up and he was in his bed. And he said he felt like it was a dream, but at the same time, like he felt like it was absolutely real. And he couldn't explain it except for the fact that maybe it had something to do with the dream catcher.
Can we show him the older homestead?
Yeah, let's go. As you know?
No, it's not. No, it's not. Was that you?
Yeah, that's on either side.
They went to both.
Yeah.
This is one of those cases that doesn't sit right with me. This is Dorothy Jane Scott. She was murdered in the 1980s, and for years, the killer tormented her family with phantom phone calls. And to this day, they are still out there somewhere. So let's dive into the story. So the story of Dorothy's disappearance is really strange. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy drove two of her friends to the hospital, as one of them had been bitten by a spider that night. So at the end of the hospital visit, while they were waiting to get a prescription filled, Dorothy Jane walked to go grab her car and bring it up so that the two friends could meet her outside. And once they were outside, the friends saw Dorothy's car coming towards them, but it quickly sped off and left them there. Now, they couldn't see who exactly was in the car, who was driving, because the headlights blinded them, but in a few hours, they reported her missing because they couldn't get in contact with Dorothy. And she would be missing for years. So in the months leading up to her murder, Dorothy had acquired a stalker. She had been receiving phone calls at work from a strange, unidentified male caller. And on these phone calls, this guy would tell her how much he loved her, and then he would state that he intended on killing her soon. One day, this phantom man even told Dorothy to go outside because he left a surprise on her car, and when she went outside to look, there was a single dead rose on her windshield, which is very creepy. On one of these particularly gruesome phone calls, the caller even stated that he planned on abducting Dorothy and chopping her up into little bits so that no one would ever find her. So these phone calls obviously terrified Dorothy, and in the week leading up to her disappearance, she started taking karate lessons. Okay, so let's flash back to the night that Dorothy disappeared. Remember, her friends were waiting for her outside of the hospital when they saw her car speed by them, but they couldn't see who was inside the vehicle. At around 4:30 a.m. that morning, 5 hours or so after they saw her car speeding away, the car was found abandoned in an alleyway 10 miles from the hospital, and it was on fire, which torched all evidence that could have been in the vehicle. So Dorothy would be missing for years, 4 years in fact. But it only took 1 week after her disappearance for the killer to start calling her own parents. So about every Wednesday afternoon for a period after Dorothy went missing, this caller would call her parents and say the strangest things. He would tell them things like, "I have her." He would also claim that he was the one who killed Dorothy. He was basically tormenting her parents and saying that he knows exactly where she is and what had happened, but he was never going to tell them. Now, 4 years later, this was going on for 4 years, in April of 1984, this caller once again called Dorothy's family, but instead of her mom picking up the phone that night, her dad did. And after her dad picked up the phone calls completely stopped. That is, until a few months later. Now, in August of 1984, a construction worker would come across a set of bones that belonged to a human and a dog. And those bones were eventually revealed to be those of Dorothy's. And immediately after her remains were found, the caller once again began to call her parents. This time the police installed a recorder that bugged the family's phones. They were trying to get this guy's voice on recording and trace the phone calls, but the calls were never long enough for them to trace, and they still had no idea who this guy was. To this day, authorities still don't know how Dorothy died. And even though the phone calls eventually stopped, the killer's never been brought to justice. Now, the only suspect that's ever emerged in this case still doesn't have a name. It's the same guy that called, obviously, Dorothy's family, but it was a man who called a local newspaper just a few days after Dorothy went missing. And on this phone call, this guy said that he loved Dorothy, she had been cheating on him, and that he was the one who killed her. So that means that to this day, this killer is probably still out there somewhere, and they've never been brought to justice. This crime occurred over 40 years ago. There are no leads, and I don't think that this is a case that will ever be solved. If this killer dies, I'm sure that they're going to take this secret to the grave with them.
What the fuck was that? Bro!
What's going on around you?
I don't know. I'm frozen. I am frozen.
Did the window
Sean.
break?
This is a 100% true story that happened to a woman in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, there was this woman named Sherry who moved into this house with her 2 children in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, she said, at the time, she didn't believe in anything supernatural. She really thought that was a bunch of nonsense. But she said, right away when they moved in, she would notice, out of the corner of her eye, sometimes shadows moving across the walls. She would hear strange noises that she couldn't explain. But she said for the most part, it was just a normal house. One night, she's upstairs in her bedroom and she's folding laundry. She hears talking coming from her son's room. So she makes her way over to his room. The door's closed. And she hears her son having a full-on conversation with someone. And she's like, who is he talking to, at 12:30 at night? So she opens the door, and when she looks in his room, he is not in his bed. So she starts yelling for him. She looks down and sees him next to the side of his bed, on his knees, crouched down, with his head under the bed, talking to someone. And she's like, hey, who are you talking to? Like, who's under there? And her son's like, I can't tell you. And she said, what do you mean you can't tell me? Like, who's under the bed? And he's like, I can't say. He'll get mad. And she's like, what? Who's under there? So she runs over to the bed and she looks underneath there. It's empty. There's nothing under there. So she's like, you know what? Just get back in bed. Like, just stop, doing whatever you're doing. Several weeks pass, and on a regular basis, she keeps finding her son talking to someone under the bed, except there's no one there. So after a few weeks of this happening, she thinks maybe something is wrong with her son. So she takes him to this child therapist. The therapist assesses him and says, he seems completely fine. It's probably just his imagination. So several months pass and he keeps on doing this. Well, one day she's sitting down in the living room with him and they're talking when she notices he has some scratches and bruises all over his body. And she's like, where did you get those scratches and bruises from? What's going on? And he's like, I can't say, I can't tell you. And she's like, yes, you have to tell me, what is going on with you? And finally he breaks down and he starts crying and stuff. And he just starts freaking out. And then he runs up to his room. So the mom, at this time is like, I don't know what to do. What is going on with my son? She's just panicking. Later that night, she's awoken to her son screaming in his bedroom. She runs as fast as she can. She goes in his room. She finds him halfway underneath the bed. He's grabbing onto the bed frame, and it looks like something is pulling him under the bed. So she immediately grabs him, pulls him out from under the bed. She looks under there. There's no one there. So she's like, you know what? This is weird. Like, you're sleeping with me tonight. You're going to be in bed with me tonight. So they go back to her bedroom. He lays down. He falls asleep. She's sitting in bed. She can't sleep. She's like freaked out about this whole situation. When all of a sudden she hears, shh, hey, come under the bed. And she's like, what? She looks over. Her son is sleeping. But then once again she hears, hey, come here, under the bed. I need to talk to you. And it's like a man's voice. And she's like, no, who are you? Like, go away. And the man's like, come on, get under the bed. I need to tell you something. And like, she's like, no, I'm not going under the bed. And she said this man, whoever he was, just started yelling obscenities and getting really angry. So she grabs her son. They get out of the house. And she said she left that night and never went back. And still to this day, that house sits there. And she said she's talked to the neighbors, and they said since she's moved, like several families have lived there, and they move out immediately.